Trompe-l'oeil is a huge subject that entire chapters and books have been written about, and it has been in use for a very long time. Case in point being the preserved walls from Pompeii. There are beautiful examples of trompe-l'oeil throughout history, one of the most famous being the Sistine Chapel, which is completely covered in trompe-l'oeil. And obviously, trompe-l'oeil has been widely used in theater. By definition, trompe-l'oeil is a trick that artists and theaters use to create the illusion of a three-dimensional object on a 2D surface, and it comes from a French term meaning deceive the eye. One of the most important things to do while learning trompe-l'oeil is to practice drawing. I recommend using black charcoal and white chalk on colored paper. To break it down simply, trompe-l'oeil is made up of 4 parts: the object color, highlight, shade, and cast shadow. The object color is obviously referring to the color of the object or surface, like stone or marble or wood. Highlight is the area of the object directly facing the light. Shade is referring to the part of the object that is not facing the light. And under that umbrella I include core shadow, the deepest dark of the shade, and reflective or bounce light, a subtle light area where some light from the surrounding area reflects into the shade area. Cast shadow is the area where the object blocks the light and casts a shadow. Along with cast shadow is cut line, which is a thin, dark line at the point where the shade and the cast shadow meet. Sometimes it can also be a light-colored highlight cut line. When I have determined where the light is coming from and start drawing, I always start with the shade and shadow, because typically they are larger than the highlight and you can begin to see the contours of your object more quickly. Once I am fairly happy with the shade and shadow, I sparingly add in highlight. It is very easy to overwork or add too much highlight, so it is best to start small and build up, because it is very distracting when done improperly. Once your highlight, shade, and shadow are all generally in place, you can better determine if you need to push your values and contrast. Usually the last thing I add is the cut line, but you have to be careful with it because it can easily ruin a nice trompe-l'oeil. The cut line helps bring the shape into focus and clarifies edges. However, it should be used sparingly, and you should be careful that it is not too dark or put in the wrong place. If it goes too far around an object, it starts to look cartoony, and it is just wrong to put against a highlight edge. A cut line does not belong there. Through manipulating the light and dark, you can vary the illusion and what it says about the object's surface material, the light source, and the object's shape or contours. For example, the use of highlight can indicate if an object's surface is matte or glossy. Supposing these two objects have the same light source, the shade and shadow don't give us too much information, but the highlight on a matte object will be very subtle and diffused. The highlight on a glossy object will be brighter and have a smaller hot spot. You can also tell if the surface of an object is rough or smooth based on the highlights and shadows. The cast shadows on a rough object will not be perfectly straight and even, and the highlights will be more dispersed, small, and broken up to only the edges that are facing the light. A smooth object will have crisp and even lines for both the shadow and highlight. The use of shade, shadow, and highlight together indicates the light source. The examples I am drawing are of a matte surface. A bright light will cause a greater contrast. The shade and shadow are darker, and the shadow has a crisp edge. A dim light results in a more subtle shade and highlight, and the shadow is more faint and often less crisp. The shadow edges could also be blurrier if there are multiple light sources or if the object is farther away from the surface. One important thing to note about the light source on a round object is that no matter how bright it is, the shade and highlight are not exact opposites from each other. It will be smaller and shouldn't cover the majority of the object color. If there is too much highlight, it will make the object look flat or warped. Adjusting the shade and highlight indicates the shape of the object. Sharp contours will have a more abrupt transition between the values, which will help flatten the shape. A larger and more gradual shade and highlight creates a more rounded object. The shadow can indicate how high a surface is raised. A thin shadow indicates a shallow groove, while a thick shadow indicates a deeper groove. If an edge is casting a shadow onto surfaces that are on different levels, it should be adjusted accordingly. Once you are confident in your ability to manipulate the values to create the desired effect, it is time to move on to painting, which will be the subject of Trompe l'œil Basics Part 2.